Have you ever noticed by March something inside you starts to shift? Not loudly, no drama, quietly. You crack a window. The air feels different. The light lingers a little longer in the evening. And suddenly, things you barely noticed all winter start asking for your attention. That drawer that's overflowing, the habit you keep repeating, the relationship that feels heavier than it used to, the thought you've been postponing, the truth you've been avoiding. Maybe that is what March is all about. Maybe that's what it really does. It doesn't just change the weather. It changes what we're finally willing to see. So you start asking questions you may have pushed aside for months. What am I holding on to? What am I tolerating? What no longer fits the life that I want now? Here's the thing. There's actually reason for this. Humans have been responding to, quote, spring, end quote, this way for thousands of years. In Iran, homes are deep cleaned before Nowruz, the Persian New Year, in a ritual that's literally called shaking the house. In Jewish tradition, families scour their homes before Passover. Catholics are abstaining and fasting during Lent. The bottom line is this. Across cultures and centuries, humans have understood something intuitively. When the world renews itself, we also feel the urge to renew ourselves. And modern science is now catching up with what our ancestors already knew. Longer daylight shifts our circadian rhythm, serotonin rises, energy increases, mood improves. Spring is not just a season. For many people, it is a biological and psychological reset point. But here's the part that interests me the most. Spring doesn't just make us want to clean our homes. It makes us want to clean up our entire lives. And that's what we're talking about today. Why change feels so difficult as we get older. Why we sometimes lie to ourselves without realizing it. And the powerful difference between habits and rituals when it comes to making real lasting change. Because the truth is this, most people are not starting from scratch. We are all starting with a little bit of experience. And that is what changes everything. Let's just relish in this March moment, okay? Since we're here. I'm recording this episode at the very beginning of the month. We're entering the third month of the year, which means we're approaching the end of the first quarter of 2026. Daylight savings time is here. By the time this episode drops, many of us in the Northern Hemisphere will already be feeling these longer days. And something about March always feels a little bit different. January is ambition. February is endurance, right? We're getting through the cold. But March just feels like an awakening, more like truth. So full disclosure, last week I was on call for the hospital, and in between cases, I spent most of my time doing something surprisingly therapeutic, deep cleaning. Not the quick tidying up kind. I mean, the real version of cleaning. Opening windows, letting that cold winter air finally move through my space, lowering the thermostat after months, the heat running nonstop, and also my utility bills, clearing surfaces, moving things around. I went through my toiletries and drawers and my closet. I've been doing that a lot actually over the last couple of months, but this past week it felt a little bit different. And while I was doing that, I also did something many of us avoid for a little too long. I took a really hard look at my finances. Yep, taxes. No fun. I did not get the best news, but that's another story. However, I looked at my accounts, my numbers. And here's the thing. Even though I wasn't quite happy, I did get something a little more important. I got clarity. And that clarity helps you to plan because I've been a little bit in limbo. And nothing about that past week was glamorous. And I'm actually going through it now because now I'm doing digital cleaning up. But something about opening those windows, letting that air just hit my apartment, clearing the surface, and facing the reality of my finances felt incredibly grounding. I'm not going to lie. I had some moments of, mild breakdowns because, you feel like everything happens all at once. But I realized something. It wasn't just cleaning. I was making space in my environment, space in my thinking, and space for decisions that I have been postponing. And I think many people feel that instinctively this time of year, not because life is falling apart, but because something inside us is beginning to thaw out a little bit, right? It's not just the trees, the flowers, all the vegetation around us. We literally feel like we're thawing out. And when that happens, we start noticing what we've been carrying for a little too long. Maybe you can relate. We're going to talk about the biology of spring energy because there is actually real science behind this. During winter, shorter daylight hours increase our melatonin production, which can make us feel a little more tired and sluggish. As the days get longer, sunlight suppresses melatonin and boosts our serotonin, the neurotransmitter that's linked to our mood, motivation, and well-being. So more sunlight also improves vitamin D production and helps regulate our circadian rhythm. What is the result of all this? People often experience better mood, higher energy, more motivation for physical activity, and with that, increased optimism. Spring is quite literally the season when humans become more biologically primed for change. If you're feeling a little more awake in March, a little more reflective, a little more willing to confront what hasn't been working, none of this is random. It's science. Part of it is emotional, part of it's seasonal, and part of it is biological. Maybe you're not feeling it yet. Even though it's been a really cold winter, I do know some people that have said, "Oh, I'm not quite ready to come out of hibernation." Here's where things get interesting. If change is biologically supported, why does it feel harder as we get older? And it's not because we lack discipline. It's because by midlife, our behaviors are no longer just behaviors. They're our identity. Can anybody relate to this? They are tied to who we are, our roles, our careers, our coping strategies, our disappointments, the stories that we've told ourselves for decades. And sometimes those stories become so familiar that we stop questioning them. Psychologists call this self-deception, AKA lying to ourselves. Now, this is not malicious lying. More often, it's a subtle psychological identity. We say things like, this, is just who I am. I've always been this way. It's too late. But often those statements are not facts. They are stories that we make up about the facts. They are rehearsed narratives. And the more we repeat these stories, as I say, the more true they begin to feel. Why then are we lying to ourselves if we know these are stories and they're not, in fact, the facts? Research in psychology shows that people often lie to themselves for a simple reason: to reduce emotional discomfort. It's going to protect the ego. In short term, that can feel really protective. But over time, those protective stories can become really like prisons because the brain actually begins to believe the story it hears most often. And if the story is, I can't change, this is as good as it gets. So the brain quietly is just going to stop trying. It's just going to throw in the towel. Basically, it's going to surrender. And that's why honesty matters so much this time of life. So this is not a shameful energy or this brutal honesty that just makes us feel bad. This is not self-attack, just a clear-eyed truth, because you cannot change what you refuse to name or measure. We have to get real with our current situation before we can do anything. And sometimes that can be hard to face. Let's talk about clearing so we can get to that point where we can see a little bit better. Research from UCLA's Center on Everyday Lives of Families found that women who described their homes as cluttered had higher cortisol levels throughout the day. Why is this? Because clutter acts as a constant visual stress. It signals a lot of unfinished work, unfinished projects, and then it overwhelms the brain's attention system. And then it quietly then tells the nervous system that something is unresolved. It's constantly signaling something needs to be fixed. But when people declutter, then the opposite's going to happen. Your dopamine rises, your focus improves, and then the stress levels drop. Even 20 minutes of cleaning can measurably reduce stress levels. Cleaning off a counter, cleaning up clothes off the floor, making your bed. And then that will set the tone for future aligned actions. When you feel the urge to spring clean, it's not superficial. It's a neurological reaction to what's going on. It's your brain and body responding to the relief that comes from order, closure, and visual progress, which is one reason spring cleaning can feel oddly emotional. You're not just moving things around, clearing out objects, you're changing the atmosphere your nervous system has been living in. And then that leads directly into something I think matters even more. Not just what we do repeatedly, but it's how we do something, right? That old saying, it's not what we do, it's how we do it. And then that leads to habits versus rituals. Here's one of the most important distinctions I've been thinking about recently as I assess why I am personally falling short in some of these areas. Habits are automatic. They're efficient. They keep us running on autopilot. And the brain's basal ganglia help manage habits to conserve energy. So we don't really have to consciously think about every action that we take throughout the day. Brushing your teeth is a habit. Checking your email first thing in the morning can be a habit. Pouring your first cup of coffee before you're fully awake, that can also be a habit. So basically, habits make our life run smoothly and efficiently. But rituals are different. Rituals are intentional. Rituals are infused with meaning. What do I mean by that? They require awareness. And research shows that rituals can reduce anxiety, improve emotional regulation, and even enhance performance because they give our brain a sense of predictability and control. Let me give you an example of these. Imagine two people starting their morning. One wakes up, grabs their phone, scrolls through emails and headlines, rushes through their coffee, and heads into the day a little bit stressed already. That is a habit loop. Now, imagine another version of that same morning. You wake up. Before you look at your phone, you open the window, you take a couple deep breaths, you make sure you drink your tea, your coffee, your morning beverage, slowly, maybe standing in front of sunlight for a minute. And maybe you talk to yourself a little bit. You ask yourself a couple questions. Who do you want to be today? That is a ritual. The coffee didn't change. The morning didn't change. The environment didn't change, but the meaning behind everything did. And that meaning changes the way your brain is going to enter the day. So here's another example. Going to the gym, habit, right? You rush in, you rush your workout, you rush out, you get a shower, you head off to your workday. However, it can also be a ritual. You change into your workout clothes with intention. You remind yourself why you're there, not just for your body, but for your mind, for your longevity, for your family, right? For the ability to keep showing up for the people and the life that matter to you most. So that tiny shift in awareness turns that same behavior into something very, very different. Now, here's why this matters so much as we get older. Many thoughtful, educated people feel like they've tried habits before and failed. They've tried the apps, they've tried the routines, they've tried productivity hacks, whiteboard, calendar, etc., alarms. But when these habits don't stick, they assume the problem is discipline. But often the problem is not the discipline at all. Successful people are generally productive people. They have no problem getting tasks done at all. The problem behind the discipline when they're feeling a little lackluster about this is meaning. Habits are easier to abandon when life gets stressful. Rituals are harder to abandon because they're tied to identity, who I am as a person. Think about a few examples many midlifers use without even realizing it. I'm just going to give you an example because I happen to work with doctors and I'm in the operating room. If you're in the office environment, right, the C-suiters, usually they open their day with a ritual and then they close their day with a ritual. Usually before leaving work, they take a few minutes, they review the day, they clear their desk, they mentally mark the transition between work and home. High performers often take a reset walk in the afternoon. They move their body, not just for exercise, but to clear their thinking and to regulate their nervous system before the second half of their day. I'm going to share this example with you because this is from my meditation teacher, David G., and I think he's brilliant. He taught us the importance of late afternoon, early evening meditation prior to wrapping up the workday and re-engaging with people that matter to you because you don't want to bring all of the stress from the day over into your relationships. His analogy is think of your morning meditation as you are setting the table for the day, and your afternoon reset, whether that's a walking meditation, stretching meditation, breathing meditation, think of that as washing the dishes. And in spring, many people instinctively perform letting go rituals through cleaning, organizing, or clearing out that clutter that no longer reflect who they are and who they were. So none of these things are just habits. They're symbolic acts that are saying to us and to the world, I am moving forward. So when we think about changing in midlife, maybe the goal isn't just building better habits. Maybe a better question could be, what rituals help you become the person you are growing into? Because habits change behavior, but rituals actually change identity. Habits make life efficient, but rituals make life meaningful. And in midlife, when roles shift, priorities evolve, and identity expands, your rituals can become anchors to really getting you to that next level from where you are to who you want to be. They remind us who we are becoming, daily rituals. So if rituals help us move forward, who we're becoming, there's another part of the equation that matters just as much, what we are willing to release. Because making space for something new rarely happens without letting go of something old habits, old environments, old expectations, and sometimes old versions of ourselves, I think, which is probably one of, if not the most important thing that we're going to let go of. And this is where change becomes emotional because the brain doesn't just store information about the past, it stores emotions related to those events in the past. When we remember something that once carried us through emotional change, it also carried an emotional charge, a disappointment, a failure, a relationship that ended, a career path that didn't unfold the way we expected. The brain can then reactivate some of those old emotional patterns that were present when it first happened. So basically, the same chemicals are being released, and that just keeps us in this vicious cycle, which means we can unknowingly keep reliving old emotional loops, even when the circumstance that created them are long gone. And that's why letting go is not about pretending something didn't matter. It's truly letting that go. It's about allowing that emotional charge around it to soften enough that the experience becomes wisdom instead of identity, the person that we're holding on to. And for many people, spring is that season when this whole process is naturally beginning. I always think of the caterpillar becoming a butterfly, which is actually a beautiful analogy for midlife as well. We start clearing closets, we sort through papers, we move things out of drawers that we have not opened in sometimes months. But what's really happening is something deeper. Growth rarely begins with adding more to our lives. It usually begins when we remove what no longer belongs. And that leaves us with a quiet, powerful question. What am I still carrying that I no longer need? Again, that's why I think butterflies are so beautiful, because you think that that butterfly was once a caterpillar. Now, caterpillars, they are just as beautiful creatures, but there's something about the butterfly, right? The beautiful, colorful wings, flying off, that transcendent like energy. I thought I'd share that. I wasn't prepared to say that, but I really thought that that would help us envision that question. What is it that you're still holding on to? Thank you for sticking with me, by the way. This is another long episode, but I do not like to leave out science and the meaning behind things because I truly do think that that helps us put things into context. There's another fascinating element to change that we don't talk about enough. And that is that emotional memory. The brain just doesn't store facts about the past. It stores that emotional charge and those experiences. And neuroscience research shows that when we recall certain memories, the brain can reactivate some of the same emotional networks that were present when the event originally occurred. So in other words, old memories can still trigger very real emotional responses even years later. A conversation, a failure, a relationship that ended, a decision that maybe you regret. The body can respond as if that moment is happening again, which is why, as I said before, it is not about pretending something mattered. It's not denial. It's not rewriting history. It's about reducing that emotional charge around the memory so it no longer runs our present situation. And when that happens, something powerful actually occurs. The memory is what stops defining us. So now we are living in our present and can focus on our future self, not past memories. But instead, our memory becomes wisdom. So we are not emotionally attached to it anymore. We can look at them as lessons learned. And that's why so many people instinctively start cleaning, because somewhere deep down, we understand this very important thing, that making space outside of us helps us make space inside of us. I know that was a little bit of repetition there, but I really wanted to hone in that message of making space on the inside and on the outside. Let me pause here for a moment and say something I think many people at this time of our life quietly feel, but do not always say out loud because it can be a little difficult. At some point in your 40s and your 50s, you begin to realize that life is not going to unfold exactly the way that you imagine. Maybe it's exactly as you imagine, maybe it's not. I'm not saying that you're not happy with your current circumstances. It just didn't happen the way that you had planned out. It's just different. And some relationships lasted, some didn't. Some dreams evolved into something completely different. And for a while, that realization can feel a little unsettling. But here's the surprising part, that moment of honesty is often the very beginning of real freedom. Because once you stop trying to force life to match an old version of the plan, you can start asking a much more interesting question. What actually matters to me now? Not so much what is true now, but what matters to me now? What matters to you now probably is different than what you thought was going to matter to you maybe 10, 20 years ago. The point I'm trying to drive across is midlife is not the moment when possibility shuts off or it closes. It's the moment when illusion begins to fall away. And what's left is something way more powerful. It might even be better. Clarity. I keep going back to that word, but here's the thing. You know more, you see patterns faster, you recognize what drains you and what nourishes you. And if you're willing to be honest with yourself, midlife may be the first time you begin living on purpose instead of by default. So if spring gives us this natural reset point, what are we going to do with it? Because insight is helpful. But most people listening want something more practical than insight. They want to know what actually works in real life. What actually can I do tomorrow? So let's make this simple. Think of spring as an opportunity for a little reset. Because the truth, we do have time. There is potential for great things to unfold moving forward. But before anything changes in your environment, something has to change in your awareness. Ask yourself 3 honest questions. What am I tolerating right now that drains my energy? What no longer fits the life am I trying to build? And where am I avoiding a decision I already know I need to make? I actually just went through this, and that decision has held up a myriad of decisions. So I finally made a decision and it felt good. Now I feel like I can move forward. Just a little personal side note for you. Psychologists call this reducing cognitive dissonance when our actions and our values finally come back into alignment. And the first step is always honesty, which I shared earlier. Step 2, we're going to clear our physical space. Clear something tangible. More research from UCLA found that people who describe their homes as cluttered tend to have higher levels of cortisol. And I'm bringing this up again because visual clutter really affects our biology. It's increasing our stress hormone. Then this clutter signals unfinished business to the brain. Again, I talked about this earlier in the podcast, but I'm wrapping it up to show you that clearing space does the opposite. It's now going to restore our sense of control and closure. But you do not have to overhaul your life in one weekend. Maybe you have little daily goals, a weekly goal to go over the next month or the next few weeks. So start small, and it could just be maybe your bedside table, right, in your calendar. One visible act of clearing space can create momentum for larger change. Basically, that's what I did. I cleaned, got clear on my finances, as unglamorous that was. However, I got clear, I got honest, and working in my personal space, I thought it's going to help my productivity of the things that I want to do building this platform. So I had to look at the big picture. Finally, step 3, create a ritual, not just a habit, a ritual. Again, habits are automatic, rituals are intentional. Research in psychology shows that rituals help regulate stress, reduce anxiety, and give you a sense of meaning and purpose and stability during transitions. And as we know, midlife is full of transitions. So your ritual does not have to be elaborate. It could be something as simple as I mentioned earlier, putting your face in morning sunlight and taking a couple breaths, maybe in prayer, meditation, whatever gets you into your body, taking a little walk in the morning, in the afternoon without your phone, and then ask yourself a question: who do you want to be today? This is not just productivity, it's identity, because habits change behavior, but rituals change who we are. And the beautiful thing about spring is that it reminds us you do not have to change everything overnight. You just have to start making space for better decisions, space for clear thinking, space for the version of yourself that is still unfolding. Here's the most important idea I want to leave you with. Midlife is not asking you to prove anything. It's just asking you to tell the truth a little bit. The truth about what matters now, the truth about who you've outgrown, and the truth about the habits, the environments, the expectations, and sometimes even the identities that no longer belong to the life you're building. And that kind of honesty can feel uncomfortable at first, but it's also incredibly powerful, because once you tell yourself the truth, you can finally start making decisions that align with the person you are becoming. And the beautiful thing about midlife is this: you are not starting from scratch. You are starting from all this experience. You have decades of observation. You've seen what works. You've seen what doesn't. You know what drains you. You know what brings you alive. The awareness is not a limitation. It is an advantage, and you have the receipts to prove it. And maybe this spring, instead of trying to reinvent yourself, you simply begin by making a little space. Space for better decisions and space for the version of yourself that is evolving. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, because if this conversation resonated with you, jump over to my website. I have more information like this on rosemarieb.com, but also in the search for a healthcare provider to help you through these changes, I've created a complimentary guide to help you choose the right healthcare professional to avoid some of the costly mistakes I've seen inside healthcare over nearly 3 decades of doing this. It's practical, it's complimentary, and I created it for you. It was very thought out, and it's designed specifically for people in midlife who want to make smarter health decisions. You can download it, like I said, at my website, rosemarieb.com. Think of it as a next step of ownership in your health and in your life. And if this episode made you think of someone, a friend, a partner, a colleague who might also be in a season of resetting or reflecting, send it to them. Pass it along, because the truth is this: the best midlife conversations rarely happen alone. They happen in community. Once upon a time, we thought change had to begin with pressure. Suddenly, midlife shows us that truth works better than force. And fortunately, spring reminds us that renewal doesn't have to be high drama. Sometimes it's just a decision you've been postponing, or simply the courage to admit what you already know. And as it turns out, letting go is not losing yourself or anything. It's how you make space to meet yourself again. This is Second Opinion, where curiosity is the real fountain of youth, and age is always your advantage. You don't need a glamorous reinvention. You need an honest one. I'm Rosemarie from New York City. Until next time.